Have you ever felt like the whole world was caving in on you? Like everything you knew was being ripped away one piece at a time? Well, welcome to March 2020, the month the whole world basically decided we're shutting down now. Sorry, good luck. You lived through it, so I know you'll remember. Everyone was terrified, confused, hoarding toilet paper, and stress baking bread. Imagine trying to keep your mental health in check during that chaotic world event, and now picture that same time frame, but at a painful heartbreak. So intense, you feel like you actually might die. Maybe you're saying, I can relate because it actually happened to you. And even if it didn't happen during the pandemic, it can feel like a personal crisis that's just as debilitating. And if that's not scary enough, in the midst of all that, a murder. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 45 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyrleigha, and I'm here with my co-host, the one who puts up with me calling him Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity is the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness brings to light.
I have to say, there have been some people who want me to stop saying Jonathan, and that's been part of our beloved intro since day one. And that made me so sad. So this is going to be the last time that you'll hear it. So just take it in. Remember it. Jonathan. Let's give them a moment of silence.
Are you really?
Just kidding.
Yeah.
When I'm researching each of these cases, it's hard for me not to notice how much personal information can be found online. And even though I am glad it helps build out these stories, it does worry me when it comes to protecting our personal data, because our personal information is constantly being collected and then it's being sold by brokers online and we don't even know it. That's why it's so important to remove your information from these lists. And I'm so glad that I found Incogni, because that is what they do. And they are kindly supporting our channel and sponsoring today's video. Incogni is a service that removes personal information from data brokers and public websites. It protects users from identity theft, spam, and other risks by preventing data brokers from selling their information.
Incogni helps protect your privacy by scanning broker databases for your personal information and then submitting removal requests on your behalf when records are found. This can reduce all those really annoying emails and even texts we randomly get. Plus, it will lower the risk of your info being leaked in a data breach.
I actually get so many of those text messages and it's out of control. And I'm always like, no, this is spam. I don't want these.
Yeah. And now scammers can use AI to mimic those voices of friends and family and trick their victims into sending them money. These scammers rely entirely on the voice data that they find online.
And that really scares me. And one of the biggest problems for us here in the US are these people search sites, because anyone, including employers, landlords, and even random strangers, can access your personal information. And that means they can use it to try to annoy you, harass you, and even stalk you or do more dangerous and illegal activities. This puts you and your family at risk. And if you're wondering what kind of personal information they have, well, it can be anything about you, and you would be surprised. Health information, your email address, your phone number, your home address, and even how many kids you have, even your hobbies or your political affiliations, even religious beliefs. And they will use this to scam you or others close to you.
The process takes hundreds of hours to do manually and requires repetition. That's why Incogni makes sense and makes it easy.
And getting started with Incogni is simple. All you have to do is create your account, authorize them to act on your behalf, and they do the rest, as you just rest assured that it's all being taken care of. And this is not a one-time process. They actually rescan and send out requests on a regular basis to data brokers and all of those people search sites. And that means they're keeping more and more of your data protected over time. So take back your personal data with Incogni. And the best part is, as a viewer or listener, you get an exclusive 60% discount when you click our link below or go to incogni.com/darklivity and use our code Darklivity. We'll put it up on the screen for you as well.
And thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring today's video.
First, I want to thank everyone who has supported us through our merch site. We are going to be taking a lot of our designs, most of our designs away and having new designs for 2025. So get them while you can. We will leave the link below for you.
Find out when the new drop happens by signing up to our emailing list.
And I am still getting to all the thank you videos. I've done a lot of them and I continue to do them. So please be patient. I'm getting to them as I can. But now let's get into the case for today. I want to bring you back to March 2020, otherwise known as the month that the entire world said, let's freak out now. If you were around, and obviously you were, you'll remember how stores ran out of toilet paper and hand sanitizer, and how we were all watching the news like hawks for any update about the virus swirling around. It was a time of confusion, fear, and an undercurrent of dread. Now put yourself in Michelle Boat's shoes. You're living in Pella, Iowa, home to about 10,000 people. It's famous for a giant tulip festival each spring. You're working a shift at the hospital's laundry department, which is already stressful enough. You're hearing whispers about the pandemic in the break room. Schools might shut down. They're saying we can't even eat at restaurants. Oh my God, we might need masks. It was a kind of panic that can make anyone want to crawl into bed and hide. But you're Michelle. You've got a 20-year marriage, pretty solid, right? Something to hold on to, something certain, predictable, comforting. Wrong. You walk in your front door one afternoon on March 12th of 2020 and discover that your husband, Nick Boat, has packed up his life and he's left you. Just like that, no warning. The house is eerily silent. You look around, taking in the emptiness. The living room TV is gone. Your coffee mug stands alone on the table. The closet, half empty. Where are Nick's clothes? All that's left is your own confusion and a sock that he forgot to grab. It's like the Twilight Zone. The entire universe is shutting down. You're supposed to be social distancing, and now you're going through heartbreak. Everything feels post-apocalyptic. You're not just alone. You're alone during a pandemic. Talk about next level panic. That sets the stage for you.
It's crazy to think about how Michelle would have felt in that moment. She had just clocked out from the laundry department, still thinking about the virus updates that she overheard at work. She stepped through the door and her entire life changed.
I went to work that day. I'm due into work at 6:30 in the morning until 3:15.
And you got off work at 3:15?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do then?
I went home and I realized that he was gone.
Do you remember what day that was?
I believe it was March 12th.
How did you feel when you realized on March 12th that Nick had left?
Heartbroken, sad, despondent, devastated, destroyed. Like my whole life had just walked out the door. There weren't gonna be any more Thanksgivings or Christmases without him. He was my whole life.
Hearing her say that, it really highlights her emotional shock. And it also shows how deeply she valued her marriage. She said at the end, as she was trailing off in tears, that Nick was her whole life.
Going back to that afternoon, Michelle tried to call Nick. Radio silence. She checks Facebook. Maybe he posted something. There was nothing. She wondered, did he block her? She calls his phone again. She gets his voicemail. The heartbreak is immediate. She's been with this man for 2 decades. They have 2 children together, a 19-year-old son, Andrew, and a 17-year-old daughter, Emma. But apparently, Nick has ghosted her, leaving Michelle to process a brand new kind of trauma in an already traumatic world. She does what a lot of people do when overwhelmed by heartbreak and fear. She reaches out for something to numb the pain. Alcohol, TV, social media rants, anything just to quiet her mind and allow her to vent. It does help in these kind of moments, but it definitely doesn't last. Because on top of everything else, she's got this nagging feeling. Who did he leave me for?
That's exactly what many of us would be thinking, because why did he just leave? And we're going to tell you something that Michelle didn't know yet.
So let's rewind back to February of 2020. Just before this meltdown, Nick Boat was casually hanging out at home, flipping through Facebook when Tracy Mondabaugh popped up on his screen with a friend request. And like many of us, you might friend someone by accident. Maybe your finger slipped. It's no big deal, right?
It's like butt dialing. I'm sure we've all done it, and there's enough memes about it to understand exactly how it can happen.
Exactly. But for Nick, it felt like a sign from the universe. Or maybe that's how he wanted to spin it.
Fate by Facebook friend request. Tracy quickly messaged Nick saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to friend you. That was a total accident." But Nick was intrigued. He liked her profile picture. She looked younger than him, and she came from Otama, Iowa, which was only 45 minutes away from Pella. So she wasn't that far either. So what are the chances, right? They start chatting, small talk turns into flirty banter, and then they exchange phone numbers. According to Nick, it was like he'd stumbled upon a real-life romantic comedy, just minus the comedic part for Michelle. He felt an electric surge of excitement. He was done with his 20-year marriage, apparently, because the next thing you know, he's packing his bags. And not in a, hey, let's talk this through way, but more like, while you're at work, I'm throwing my stuff in my truck and never coming back way. It would be shocking to most of us, and now Michelle's reality. Sparks fly and hearts break. It was March 8th when Nick and Tracy finally met face to face. He described their connection as instant, the kind of chemistry you only see in cheesy Hallmark movies, walks along the creek, looking for deer antler sheds. Another thing I'd never heard of. Nothing says true love quite like scavenging for discarded animal parts, but I guess everyone has their thing, right? By March 11th, Nick couldn't pretend anymore. He told Michelle that he'd fallen in love with someone else. 3 days. Their marriage had outlived its expiration date in just 3 days. 20 years gone.
So did Michelle know he left her for someone else?
Well, this was just one day before she came home to find him gone. And there's more. Michelle was shocked. She told herself there's no way that Nick was leaving by choice. He hadn't just fallen in love. There's just no way. Instead, she insisted that someone had to have stolen him from her. In her mind, Nick was the victim of some sinister woman's trap. So she believed she could get him back. And this is where denial meets obsession.
The thing is, this was Nick's choice. At the time, he felt like he was experiencing a rebirth. Nearly a decade younger than him, this woman sparked the thrill of a teenage crush. He spent his days glued to his phone, exchanging flirty texts with her. He hadn't felt this way in a very long time. Once they met, their connection was so powerful that he packed up his bags and left.
The thing is, Nick had tunnel vision. He was in a love or a lust trance because love takes more time. And Nick couldn't foresee how deeply his departure would shatter Michelle. The heartbreak and pandemic stress brewed into a toxic cocktail for her. Michelle was unraveling. At first, she wallowed in her sadness, drinking, crying, rereading old text messages from Nick. But heartbreak can morph into rage if you let it fester. And that's exactly what started to happen. She was determined to get him back no matter what. After all, in her mind, he needed to be guided back to her out of the lure of some evil woman. That's the denial. She thought that she would be a little proactive, if you will. She set out to win back her man. So what did she do? She marched down to Nick's workplace, Vermeer Manufacturing, demanded he leave with her. Actually, she was forcing him to. Right there in front of everyone, she physically attacked him, punches thrown, coworkers gasping in shock. And not surprisingly, a security guard escorted her out of the building, telling her, never come back or you're getting charged. How did she think that was going to work out, or that it would even be a good idea?
Right. I think it's important to remember that open communication is important.
It is important.
But Michelle was unfazed. She was persistent. She wasn't giving up that easily. So she called Nick after the incident and demanded that they get together to discuss their differences. She told Nick that he belonged at home with her and that she would bring him back, willing or not.
Okay, so it's getting possessive at this point. I can understand her pain and her frustration, but that's not going to work. Because you can't force someone to love you or be with you. And acting like this probably wasn't appealing.
And now Michelle's phone calls to Nick escalated from "please come home" to "I'm warning you, Tracy better let you go."
Then she left him a voicemail saying, tell that bitch, you know that fucking bitch you're sleeping with, that she messed with the wrong mama. Now we have this message, so we're going to play it for you.
And tell the bitch, whore that you're sleeping with. She met with the wrong mama.
So let me get this straight. He was supposed to relay that message to Tracy.
That's what it sounds like.
And you could almost hear the menacing undertone. She makes the reference to mama, like a fierce mama bear protecting her cubs. But she also spat out lines like, he doesn't belong to you, return him or else, like he was an overdue library book or something. But the message was clear. There would be consequences if Tracy didn't step aside and return her man. If you think that's scary, it gets worse. Michelle discovered who this Tracy person was, and as soon as she did, she started obsessively looking through her Facebook page and then even following Tracy around town. She basically turned into a full-blown stalker. On March 20th, she trailed her for 40 minutes from Pella to Ottawa, where Tracy was living at the time, staying just close enough that Tracy could see her silver Cadillac's headlights in the rearview mirror. Tracy freaked out. There was this creeping sense of dread washing over her because she realized who it was. It was Nick's so-called psycho wife. Tracy called the sheriff, who ended up meeting her at a gas station while Michelle lurked not too far away, just watching all this.
And when Michelle was confronted, she just shrugged and said, I just need to see where they live.
Wait, why?
Well, Michelle didn't deny following Tracy, but told the officer she had a perfectly valid reason. In her mind, Tracy had stolen her husband, and Michelle was simply trying to figure out where he was living so she could beg him to come home. She claimed she was worried about him, and she needed to make sure he was okay. But he is a grown man, and her explanation didn't sit well with authorities. The sheriff had to explain to Michelle that stalking and harassment were not acceptable ways to resolve personal disputes. After this, Tracy and Nick gave their own versions of stories to officers and served Michelle a restraining order. So what do you think? Do you think that stopped her?
No, because after physically stalking Tracy didn't work, she began scrolling through Tracy's social media, and then she slid into her DMs with really creepy messages like, you'll be seeing my face in your dreams very soon because I'll be there when you open your eyes in the morning and when you close them at night. And with that message, she even attached a photo of herself at a computer as to say, I'm watching you. Her expression was cold and unrelenting, and Michelle was sure that these threats would end their relationship, but instead, it only strengthens it. Tracy and Nick found her threats humorous at first, just simple-minded and immature. They believed that they were soulmates, and that Michelle would eventually get tired of her attempts to get Nick back, and she would move on with her life. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Just 2 days later, Michelle felt like she was losing it entirely. She checked herself into a mental health facility. If you're imagining that she's going there for help, maybe yes and maybe no. Some sources suggest she wanted Nick to see how bad things really were for her, hoping that he would rush to her side to save her. But he didn't. Nick stayed with Tracy. So by the time Michelle got out 5 days later, she was more wound up than ever.
Upon her release, they recommended that she seek ongoing counseling. But unfortunately, she didn't.
Of course not. But she did leave the facility a very heartfelt online review, praising the staff for taking excellent care of her when she needed it the most. But now I want to talk about the countdown to day 69. This was shocking. Michelle was obsessed with counting every single day since Nick left her. She would literally mark the days off on a calendar. Day 1, day 2, day 3, like she was in prison or something. You know how prisoners will lose track of time because not all of them have windows in their cell, so they'll mark the days on the wall. Prisoners would use things like toothpaste, or if they're lucky, they'll be given a pencil, and they'll use that. Michelle used a black Sharpie. On each calendar square, she would simply write, 5 days gone, 6 days gone, and so on. By March 17th, 2020, it would be day 68. That day, she posted a dark Facebook status about how people should be thankful for every day of life because not everyone gets to grow old. This would be very creepy looking back after day 69. But before we go there, let's backtrack. Once Michelle was home from her hospital stay, she turned to Facebook as an outlet for her pain and emotional needs. Her daily posts were dripping with desperation and heartbreak, with a little religion sprinkled in here and there. You know, those graphics with the Bible verses, along with posts like one where she shared a photo of Nick and she captioned it, "Posting pictures of my husband who is lost. Please help him find his way home so he can be safe again. Signed, Mrs. N. Boat." In a second post, she wrote, "It's been a few weeks now, and he's still lost. God, please show him the way home before he ends up getting hurt. Signed, Mrs. N. Boat. Her third and final plea spoke directly to Nick. You're the most important person in my life besides the kids, honey, and I love you so much, Mrs. N. Boat. Despite the formal sign-off, the messages were raw, deeply personal, and painfully public.
I think it's safe to say that Michelle wasn't handling this breakup very well.
That would definitely be an understatement.
It's obvious that Michelle was emotionally unraveling. Her behavior resembled an emotional meltdown that was driven by her obsession with reclaiming what she believed was rightfully hers.
It's one thing to be heartbroken over a marriage falling apart, but do you really own that person?
No, but I do believe it's fair that someone owes you closure.
I think that too, but not everyone feels that way, but I do understand feeling as though you rightfully invested in a marriage, especially one that went 20 years. That's truly hard, but how you handle it makes all the difference.
Right. For context, this was Michelle's second marriage. Her first also ended in divorce, a loss that she truly never recovered from. She often compared Nick to her ex, even telling him she still loved her first husband and that Nick was a poor substitute who could never measure up.
And that's exactly why her desperation to win him back left Nick really confused. Why would you fight so hard for someone that you were always belittling? Michelle would verbally mistreat Nick throughout the relationship, and he was actually pretty shocked that she wanted him back. But isn't that how it goes? It's the if I can't have you, no one else can mentality. That said, Nick doesn't get off that easily here. He was the one who claimed he accidentally met Tracy through Facebook. However, some sources suggested they actually connected through Facebook dating, which was fairly new at that time because he reportedly had an active profile on there.
Regardless of how they met, the turmoil in Nick and Michelle's marriage wasn't something new. Apparently, it had been a loveless marriage for over the past decade.
And even love can turn to resentment fast. And Michelle knew how to push Nick's buttons. She was loud. She was an in-your-face type of person, and that can really get to someone after a while.
Right, she would be the type of person to scream at the top of her lungs to get her point across as though she thought being louder equaled being more clear. Nick had told her he wanted to leave numerous times, but once he met Tracy, I guess he finally worked up the courage and left.
Michelle didn't think he would ever leave her. She was used to getting her way, used to Nick bending at the knee, following her commands, but he did leave. Not only that, he was happy and she wasn't. It seemed to push her over the edge. Then on day 69, May 18th of 2020, a 911 call came in from a woman in Pella who claimed that she had just witnessed a fight between a couple. Let's listen to a portion of that call now.
Department. Yeah, I live over at 21 Glenwood. I just went outside to smoke a cigarette, and it looked like a scuffle between a couple. Well, when I saw her get out of the truck, her face is just all bloody.
Do you have any idea what apartment she might have went in?
No, she looks like she just got in the car and left. Looked like a Cadillac almost, cream or light-colored off-white.
Clearly, there was some kind of domestic dispute from what this lady on the phone relayed to the dispatcher, and she saw someone walking away covered in blood. Of course, an officer was sent out to the address immediately. It was the back section of an apartment complex at 101 Glenwood Street, where the garages to the units were located. When the officer pulled up, he saw a maroon pickup truck parked in front of the garage for unit number 4. As he approached the driver's side of the truck, he could see a black purse on the ground with its contents scattered all around. As he got even closer, he noticed the driver's side door to the truck was wide open, and he could see 2 legs in a pair of distressed jeans wearing black boots hanging outside the vehicle. He got even closer, using his flashlight to illuminate the interior of the truck, and that's when he noticed the person still had their seatbelt fastened, and the upper half of their body was leaning over the center console and into the passenger seat, and they were wounded. Here's what he said over the radio as he requested an ambulance.
Call Starman ambulance. We have someone that's laying in the back in a car seat of pickup. Doesn't look like they're responding. Lots of blood. Bleeding from the hand. Really large open wound. Ma'am, are you awake? Hello?
As you probably heard, the victim was a woman and there was a lot of blood at the scene. It was all over the inside of the driver's side door, under the window, smeared on the steering wheel, and even sprayed on the dashboard. There was even drops of blood all over the victim's jeans and soaked into her sweater. She wasn't responding to the officer, but help was on the way, and as soon as EMTs got there, they began performing life-saving measures. As they got face-to-face with the victim, they could tell that she was involved in a violent struggle. Aside from the purse and personal items thrown around, the victim's teeth were also found at the scene. A set of dentures were on the ground. They had apparently been knocked out in the altercation. They also noticed a fingertip portion of a blue latex glove, but there were no other gloves at the scene. The EMTs wore purple gloves, so this stood out. It definitely didn't belong there. Assuming the purse belonged to the victim, first responders located her driver's license and identified her as Tracy Mondabaugh.
Now, of course, we're somewhat familiar with who Tracy is. For one, we know she's Nick's new girlfriend, the woman that Michelle Boat hates. But officers have no idea who she is or how she ended up outside this building, wounded and clinging to life. 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh was born on March 18th of 1973. She was one of 5 children, including 3 sisters, Sandy, Tammy, Terry, and a brother, Travis. She was also a mother to 4 children and 10 grandchildren. Wow. Tracy had 3 sons and a daughter, Jerry, Shane, Ronnie, and Christina. A very big, loving family. She and her daughter were very close, and her daughter had recently had a new baby. There were pictures of Tracy proudly holding the little one at the hospital and smiling in selfies. She appeared genuinely happy, and we know that she and Nick were apparently in love. And sadly, Tracy was now dead. Day 69 of Nick being gone, Tracy lost her life.
When police reached out to Tracy's next of kin to deliver the heartbreaking news, they were shocked. They said they were so happy she had Nick in her life. They said that he was such a great guy, he treated Tracy really well and called her the love of his life. Ever since he met Tracy, Nick said for the first time in his life, he knew what true love was.
So, of course, homicide investigators are now on Tracy's case within no time at all. As a matter of fact, they ran the license plate on the maroon truck that Tracy had been found in, and it was registered to Nick Boat. And they discovered a matching silver Cadillac registered to the same address, 135 Prairie Street in Pella, the residence Michelle used to share with Nick, where Michelle was still living. The 911 caller had mentioned seeing someone flee in a light-colored Cadillac. There had also been a man and a woman standing on a nearby patio balcony overlooking the parking area where the altercation occurred. And they too said they distinctly recall hearing a woman repeatedly shouting, "He's not your man. He doesn't belong to you." And then they saw a light-colored silver or white vehicle with a Vermeer sticker attached to the front window fleeing the scene. One of the lieutenants recognized the name Nick Boat. It does stand out, and he had handled one of the issues pertaining to Michelle's behavior and harassment. And he remembered the Cadillac being connected to Michelle Boat. Remember, she had been following Tracy around, leading to that restraining order? This was all put together within minutes, and officers headed over to where Michelle was living, which was only a 5-minute drive from Tracy and Nick's apartment.
So when they arrived, they noticed the Cadillac sitting in the driveway, and the brake rotors were still warm. So that means that the car had been driven recently. The body cam footage shows officers standing outside the front door. They were knocking for a good 5 minutes with no answer. There were no blinds on the front window so they could see right inside, and there were no signs of Michelle or anyone else, only her dogs, barking relentlessly. The officers radioed to the station and told them to find the phone number for Michelle Boat and try reaching her that way. Meanwhile, they walked to the side of the house and saw a light on in the bathroom window. So they knocked on the side of the home, yelling for Michelle to come out. And finally, there was some movement. It was Michelle. She's now opening the front door, her hair is wet, and it's up in a towel. She's wearing a robe and nothing else, acting as though she's confused as to why the cops are there.
She really said, "I'm in the shower, what do you need?" I mean, this is such an inconvenience to her, right? The officers ask if they can come in, and she lets them inside. They tell her that Tracy Mondabaugh is wounded, and she's sitting there acting completely clueless. She said she had no idea what had happened, and of course she had nothing to do with it. But her car told a different story. There were obvious blood droplets on the exterior passenger side of her car. Michelle was taken into custody and escorted to the police station for questioning. They had probable cause to search the premises. The home was not large, and right away, one of the officers heard something coming from the basement. It was dark now, and all he had was his flashlight. He followed the noise and realized it was coming from the washing machine. But he could tell that there was only a few items inside. Basically, she had been doing laundry, but only cleaning one outfit. That's it. A pair of jeans, a dark-colored zip-up jacket, a bra, a shirt, and a pair of socks. I wonder why only one single outfit is being washed that night. I wonder why Michelle's in the shower. I wonder. And the detectives noticed there were no clothing inside the bathroom where Michelle had showered. So of course it was obvious the clothes being washed were the ones Michelle had on. But in the bathroom, they did find a set of keys on the vanity, and they noticed something right away. Dark-colored hairs were on them. Even more evidence.
Meanwhile, Nick is notified about what's going on, and he's questioned about his whereabouts that day, the last time he saw his girlfriend alive, and if he knew who would have done this. Nick explained that he was at work at Vermeer that day, and Tracy had dropped him off and was driving his maroon pickup truck while he was working so she could go do some laundry at the laundromat. Then she came back in the evening on his break and brought him some Burger King. The two of them ate together inside his truck, then she left to go back to the apartment that they shared. Nick, of course, relayed all of the issues that he had with Michelle stalking and harassing them.
She had even made threats on Tracy's life, saying that she was going to pay for stealing her man.
So detectives obtained footage from a security camera outside of Nick's workplace to confirm his whereabouts that day, and sure enough, they see Tracy pull in, driving the red pickup truck. But then they spot something else. It's Michelle's Cadillac. It's pulling into the Vermeer parking lot and parks in a spot behind the truck. And it's there the entire time Nick and Tracy are inside the truck eating together. After Nick gets out and goes back into work and Tracy leaves in Nick's truck, Michelle follows closely behind her. The two vehicles leave Vermeer parking lot at 8:10 p.m., and the 911 call came in just 10 minutes later.
Wow, that's so eerie seeing that. And first of all, and we'll get into more of this later, but I can't help but wonder why they hadn't noticed her car behind them. I'm assuming they could have been preoccupied with eating. They're looking forward. They're spending time together. They're laughing. They're completely oblivious to the fact that she's parked just a few feet behind them in a mostly empty parking lot beside some work vehicles. I was trying to estimate how close Michelle was to the truck, and it appears to me she's only about one car length away with no cars in between. That struck me as very odd, because we know that she had been following Tracy in the past and been harassing them, and now she's following Tracy again.
So about that restraining order, Michelle following Tracy and spying on her and Nick at Nick's workplace was a clear violation of the no contact provision. That alone was enough to arrest Michelle and get her behind bars while they investigate further. So now back at Michelle's house, detectives find another crucial piece of evidence. There was a black choker necklace stuck to one of the Cadillac's windshield wipers.
Not only that, guess what was stuck to this choker? A bunch of dark brown hair. A pretty big clump. And guess who has that same color hair and is known to wear chokers? Tracy. Clearly the choker had been ripped off of Tracy's neck, and somehow it was thrown on top of Michelle's Cadillac, and then it stuck to it because of its magnetic clasp.
Wow.
Between that, the blood droplets, and the blue gloves they found in the car's center console, binoculars on the passenger seat, various tools that could be used as weapons, it was starting to all come together.
But there was one more piece of evidence that would connect Michelle right to the crime scene. One of the officers was searching Michelle's bathroom and he noticed the toilet was running. Maybe that wasn't related to what he did next, but it was enough to make him lift up the tank, and sure enough, there was a soggy washcloth jammed in the tank, and it looked like it had blood on it. Wadded up inside was a pair of blue latex gloves, and one was missing the tip of the ring finger that matched the glove tip found at the crime scene.
Well, if you ever needed a neon sign saying guilty, there it was. How would she explain that? The glove matched the tip perfectly, clearly ripped off in a struggle. Tracy was brutally attacked and stabbed. One of her hands was so badly wounded that her thumb was almost sliced completely off. She was covered in defensive wounds as she fought for her life, trapped inside the truck, unable to run, and ultimately she was stabbed right in the chest. The medical examiner reported the stab wound would have almost immediately stopped her heart, and she died within maybe 30 seconds to under a minute's time.
Michelle maintained that she had nothing to do with what happened to Tracy. But at the time, she wasn't informed that Tracy had died from her wounds. When they told her, Michelle's response was chilling. She said, "Well, God works in mysterious ways." This was meant to say that Tracy got what she deserved for messing with someone else's man. The investigators believe that this was a very telling statement that showed her clear lack of remorse.
With all this evidence, Michelle was quickly charged with first-degree murder of her estranged husband's girlfriend, Tracy Mondabaugh. It was clear to investigators that this was strategic, that she had it all planned out. Or did she? Because according to Michelle, it was a chicken craving that turned deadly.
I'm sorry, a chicken craving?
Yeah, wait till you hear this. Michelle claimed that she had exactly $6 left in her bank account, after losing out on the double income she used to have when she was with Nick and not working because of the pandemic. So that evening, she wanted to treat herself to some chicken from Culver's. You gotta love comfort food. But as fate, as she described it, intervened, she was driving around town on May 18th, just minding her own business, trying to get some chicken at Culver's, but the drive-through line was taking way too long. She waited for a bit, but was impatient, so she left to go home. But then all of a sudden, she spotted Nick's maroon F-150 parked at the laundromat nearby. She thought Nick would be driving, so she had this urge to find out where he had moved and beg him one last time to come home. But she got a surprise. It wasn't Nick in the truck. It was Tracy. And for Michelle, that sight was a special kind of fury. Tracy had not only stolen her husband, but she was using the truck that she and Nick had bought together.
Michelle and Nick had actually stopped smoking so they could save the money they used to use on cigarettes to buy that truck. Michelle's rage boiled over. The chicken craving disappeared, and a new craving surfaced, a craving for revenge. She decided to follow Tracy since Tracy was doing laundry. She figured Tracy would head back home and lead her to where she and Nick were living now. Plus, Michelle could also use this opportunity to confront Tracy and tell her to leave Nick alone.
So there was Tracy, oblivious to all of this, just driving around, apparently on a routine errand, with no clue that Michelle was tailing her. At some point, Tracy stopped at Burger King to grab some food for her and Nick to eat together on his break. And we know that Michelle watched them from a distance, but they weren't just eating. They were kissing, laughing, and being affectionate in a way that Nick hadn't been with Michelle in years. The heartbreak led to a darkness that I can only describe as the literal definition to this podcast. This is Darklivity. It's the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind that brought deadly consequences. This once seemingly normal, stable mother and wife turned into a cold-blooded killer.
What happened to Vermeer? She parked the truck and he came out of the building and got in the truck. And they ate whatever they got from Burger King, I'm assuming is what they ate, because they ate. And then he turned to her and he kissed her. And then he kissed her again.
You know what? She said she was too impatient to wait for 4 cars ahead of her in the drive-thru at Culver's, but she did have the patience to wait at Vermeer for over 30 minutes just watching Nick and Tracy. But hearing her talk about seeing them kiss, in many of these cases, I might say that I don't think the emotions are genuine, but I actually do think that Michelle was in psychological turmoil. Sure, it was rooted in emotional instability, unresolved trauma, and obsession with Nick's new love interest, but the motivation to act in a violent manner after losing someone you love can be more profound than jealousy alone.
For some people, romantic relationships become the foundation of their entire identity. When that bond is broken, it can feel like a complete collapse of self. The fear of being alone, abandoned, or replaced can create a desperate need to regain control, and that fixation can become a deadly game where they'll do anything to win.
Yes, and they see winning as the goal at that point. They see their rival as a threat to who they are, and eliminating this threat can become a twisted form of their perceived self-preservation. Being left for another person can shatter an individual's self-worth. I look deeper into situations like this, and some women experience what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And I know, I had never heard of this before, but it's where rejection feels not just painful, but unbearable. The rival becomes a symbol of personal failure, making revenge seem like the only way to restore dignity and win back what was lost.
And in some cases, the rival is no longer a person, but an obstacle to be removed.
And they could even convince themselves that their actions are justified, thinking, I'm protecting my family or their future. And this can warp reality to the point where violence feels not only rational, but actually necessary. The brain's need to resolve emotional pain can override moral reasoning. And that might be what we're seeing in this case, but maybe not.
After finishing what would tragically be her final meal, Tracy said goodbye to Nick as he hopped out of the truck and went back into work. Then Tracy headed back to the apartment she and Nick were sharing.
But picture this little detail that must have felt like it was done on purpose to hurt Michelle even more, which it probably wasn't. But it was the same apartment complex where Michelle and Nick had first lived together when they were dating, a time when they were in love. To Michelle, the sight was a painful reminder of everything that she lost, and this really amplified her sense of betrayal.
Michelle pulled into that parking lot at Greenwood Apartments and parked next to Nick's truck on the left. Tracy was still inside, strapped into her seatbelt, checking her phone and finishing her drink. That drink was later found spilled everywhere with the cup on the ground outside the vehicle. Tracy probably didn't even notice Michelle was there until she stormed up to the truck.
I got out because I wanted to tell her. I wanted to tell her how much I wanted him back. And I wanted her to leave him. And I got out of the truck. I got out of the car. And I went around to talk to her. And I opened the truck door, and she started hitting me and screaming at me, calling me a crazy bitch.
Was there anything else that you noticed when you opened the door to the truck?
Yes, it smelled like smoke. The truck smelled like smoke, and we had purposely quit smoking to buy that truck. That's what the money we used to pay for that truck.
So Michelle claimed that she was only there to talk to Tracy, to say, give Nick back. But what actually happened was far more violent. She started yelling about the truck smelling like cigarette smoke. Tracy smoked. The habit that Nick and Michelle tried so hard to quit. And Michelle was convinced Tracy was responsible for her failed marriage. She grabbed Tracy's purse, she dumped its contents onto the ground, searching for cigarettes, as though this was proof of yet another violation of her shared past with Nick. In Michelle's version of events, this is when Tracy began to lash out first, actually attacking Michelle.
She was hitting me and hitting me and hitting me, and I had my hands up. She's yelling at me. And I just snapped, and I grabbed the knife, and I just stabbed her, and I dropped the knife.
Okay, so Michelle snapped.
Well, she says that she did, but it was Michelle who came there to confront Tracy. She opened the truck's door and began to get in Tracy's face. She was the one that grabbed Tracy's personal belongings and rummaged through them. And Michelle conveniently had a knife with her. And she was wearing gloves. How do you explain that?
Well, Michelle explained that the gloves were used for COVID protection, and a lot of people were wearing gloves at that time because of the pandemic and believing it would help keep them from getting the virus. She also had an excuse for the knife being with her. She claimed that since Nick left her, she no longer felt protected and safe, so she began keeping a knife with her in her car since she would be out and about all alone. Michelle said that she only grabbed for that knife through her open passenger side window when Tracy started to hit her.
Tracy was still strapped into the driver's seat. She had no real chance to defend herself, let alone try to attack Michelle. She was essentially defenseless. All Michelle had to do was skip the part where she stabbed Tracy in the heart and just do what she did afterward. Get into her car and leave. It's that simple. But despite Michelle's repeated denials, this case was never about who committed the murder or how it was done. The prosecution argued it wasn't even a matter of why. It was basically an open and shut case to them. However, the defense insisted the motive was crucial. They painted Michelle as a woman in extreme emotional crisis, overwhelmed by the pandemic stress, heartbreak, and panic. Their argument? This was a crime of passion, a spontaneous act driven by rage and partial self-defense, mixed with a mental break. You decide and weigh in with your own comments. And speaking of comments, I thought it was important to highlight some of the comments I found on Michelle's last Facebook post, where the public gave their thoughts on this situation. One woman commented, "Moral of the story here, folks, is don't get involved with a married individual. People are cray." She even looks psycho. Another person pointed out this wasn't the first time Nick had stepped out on Michelle, according to a Facebook relationship post that she dug up. And this triggered more comments like, "I think he was gaslighting his wife. If I'm wrong, I apologize. If I'm right, I wish him the life he deserves. Although I don't condone her actions, I feel bad for her. He made her that way, I believe. Karma. That's all I can say."
But others were quick to say that justifying murder because your man left you for someone else is evil and the problem with the world today, even though one commenter said it's been going on since biblical times. And with that in mind, another person wrote, "It's not about the husband. She murdered someone. Just because he might be a jerk is no excuse to kill his girlfriend." Then another said, "Nick was being abused for years and had a restraining order on Michelle. Just because the gender roles are reversed doesn't mean the man is still to blame. Believe it or not, the wife can also be an aggressor in the relationship."
Still, what was concerning was there seemed to be more women in these comments who actually empathized with Michelle in all this. One said, "I'm sorry, but her ex-husband has to take some responsibility in this tragic situation. What are your thoughts?" Please leave them in the comments because I was reading through all these and there were hundreds. I picked out a few here, a few there, but these women, the comments shocked me and people responded. They were like, "Wow, we don't want to see you on the street," because there were women saying, "Oh, I would kill this person," and going off.
I have definitely heard people say, I'm gonna hurt that guy, or I want to kill that person just because they're angry or mad. You know, like the FedEx guy missing their package or something.
Right. I think we've all at some point said like, "Oh, I want to get this person." You're mad at them, but then you don't actually go and do it. But doing it is what's very different. Yet somehow I believe that some of these women in the comments would actually kill a woman that messed with their marriage. In this case, people began doing more digging and they found out that Nick already had a new girlfriend after Tracy was murdered.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, apparently in August of 2020, just a few months after Tracy died, Nick and his new woman were posting a lot of pictures on Facebook together. And one commenter pointed that out. And she said, "He isn't shy about posting pictures on the internet about how in love they are. Go figure." Yeah, Michelle was a little mental over him, but I guarantee he is no angel and he mind fucked her into crazy. Killing is never right, but I truly think she became insane and obsessed from emotional, psychological games and gaslighting so long. She should serve time and pay for the murder, but he should be part to blame. And I want to comment that murdering someone is not the answer, period. So of course, there were a lot of backlash in the comments responding to these kind of statements. But let's get to the trial because these arguments are interesting and I wondered what a jury would think.
Prosecution walked into the court like, "Listen, we have DNA, eyewitnesses, threatening messages, stalking records, and a ton of evidence. Good luck, defense."
Scorned, obsessed, seething. It's May 18th, 2020, and a woman by the name of Tracy Mondabal maneuvers a pickup truck through the drive-thru at the Burger King in Pella, Iowa. She's picking up an evening meal for herself and her boyfriend, a man named Nick Boat. The truck Tracy is driving is Nick's truck. Tracy doesn't know it, but as she squeezes that pickup truck through the narrow drive-through lane, Tracy's being watched. Some might even say hunted. Nearby, her hunter watches through the window of a Cadillac. Her hunter is scorned, obsessed, and seething. And her hunter is prepared, armed, and angry. Very angry. Oblivious, Tracy places her order and drives forward. And when the cashier hands her her food in that brown paper bag, little does she know that will be her very last meal.
The prosecution showcased how Michelle was obsessed over Nick's departure for months. She threatened Tracy, followed her around, and ultimately attacked her with a level of planning that screamed premeditation. They hammered home that Michelle wore those blue latex gloves, not because of COVID, but because she didn't want to leave any fingerprints. She thought she could outsmart the cops. They pointed to the items found inside Michelle's car, a hammer, a shovel, tire iron, and a butcher knife, suggesting that she was prepared for a confrontation.
And he didn't fail to mention to the jury that Nick was still technically married, but he had separated from Michelle and he was moving forward. But Michelle was not.
The prosecutor assured the jury that there would be little room for doubt about who committed this murder, and even less about the fact that it was deliberate and premeditated. He pointed to Michelle's calendar, where she had obsessively marked each day since her husband left, a visual reminder of her growing fixation, and the video evidence of Michelle stalking Tracy at Burger King, and then watching Nick and Tracy at Vermeer Manufacturing, and again as she followed Tracy on the short drive back to their apartment.
But before Tracy can undo her seatbelt, this defendant is on her. Being scorned, obsessed, and seething has led to this moment. The defendant is armed with a knife and is wearing latex gloves. She stabs at Tracy. Tracy tries to fight back, pulling the defendant's hair and trying to defend herself. But she's unarmed. She's unaware the attack was coming, and she was restrained by a seatbelt. In the end, Tracy Mondabaugh never stood a chance. We'll see that Tracy has defensive wounds to her hands, but despite her efforts, one of the stab wounds slices into and stops Tracy's heart. Nearby, we'll learn that one neighbor hears someone saying something like, "He's mine. You can't have him." Another neighbor sees someone covered in blood walking away from the truck.
I did notice on that calendar, and I didn't see it pointed out, after day 69, if you look closely, and I'll put it on the screen for anyone that's actually watching, it actually said court at 1:30. So I kind of thought, I don't know what that court hearing was, but what if it was like something to do with the restraining order, the harassment? That was never really talked about. So I kept questioning it in my head, like, was there a reason that that day was significant?
I don't know.
It was also 2 months from the day of Tracy's birthday, like on the same date, but 2 months later, which I also thought was eerie.
So back to the trial. Not only was Tracy's hair found on Michelle's car, but Michelle's hair was found in the truck and clenched in Tracy's closed fist upon autopsy, showing that Tracy was doing all she could to fend off her attacker, and how it only took law enforcement 17 minutes to identify Michelle as their prime suspect.
The responding officers, as you might expect, are focused on trying to save the life of the bloody, limp woman still in the seatbelt. They try heroically to save her life, but the damage was just too much. The stab wound, just too deep, too well placed. We'll learn Tracy Mondabaugh's heart beat for the last time in the blood-soaked cab of Nick's truck.
Even Nick took the stand and testified against Michelle. And to her, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. He didn't say much more than what we've already told you. But of course, Michelle was very emotional as she watched the man that she loved talking about how he met Tracy and fell in love. Nick described their instant connection, claiming that they felt like lifelong friends from the start. Then he told the court what he and Tracy did the day she was killed.
Mr. Cope, do you remember what shift you were working on May 18th of 2020?
I worked the second shift, 2 to 11:30.
How did you get to work that day?
Tracy took me.
Do you recall which vehicle you rode in?
She took me in the F-150.
At some point later that afternoon, did you see Tracy Mondabaugh again?
Yes, she brought me supper.
What time did you see Tracy again?
7:35. It is normally at 7:30 to 8, but she was running a little behind, so I went out about 5 minutes later than 7:30.
Do you recall why she was running behind?
She was actually at the laundromat doing laundry and did not have enough time to run home and get anything to eat. So she stopped at Burger King.
Where did you eat your supper?
In the parking lot in the pickup.
Was it just you and Tracy?
Yes.
Was this a special occasion, or is this something that you would typically do?
It was typically what we did. She would come and bring me lunch.
Any particular reason?
So we could spend time together.
Nick admitted that just 3 days after his first date with Tracy, he told Michelle that he had fallen in love with someone else and was leaving her. But Michelle refused to accept this, allegedly telling him that she would not allow him to divorce her. Things quickly turned violent when she attacked him, leaving him with a cut near his eye and bruises across his body.
She also constantly called him names like worthless, and Nick said, "I don't understand why she wants me back. She never loved me."
Several witnesses testified about things like digital evidence. It was overwhelming. They found a Facebook message from Michelle to one of Tracy's exes. Michelle had told this ex that he should get back with Tracy so she would leave her husband and Michelle could have him back. This showed that Michelle believed that if Tracy were taken out of the equation, then Nick would just come right back to her. This further strengthened the prosecution's argument that this was her plan all along.
And then there were the voice messages. Nick saved all of the crazy messages that Michelle left him about wanting Tracy dead. Let's listen to one of those now.
You know, ignoring me isn't going to do you any good. Because sooner or later, I'm going to find her and I'm going to kill her. And then you're going to feel the pain that I feel right now. Being sober after 20 years of marriage. Well, a woman scorned.
Ignoring her wasn't going to work with Michelle. She said it herself. She was going to find Tracy and kill her. The way she ended with, well, a woman scorned. And then she just went, Now, I'd heard this phrase so many times, and I looked up the full quote. It's heaven has no rage, like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury like a woman scorned. It originates from the play The Mourning Bride by William Congreve, who was a prominent English playwright in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. So this concept that no one is angrier than a woman who has been rejected by someone she loves has been around a long time.
Sometimes Michelle would just scream into the phone and even leave messages with songs playing as though she was trying to send a cryptic message. And other times she left messages just degrading Tracy, calling her names and even foreshadowing what was to come.
I don't think you have any idea what I'm capable of. And neither does she. Because she's going to die. One way or another. I'll kill her. It might take me a little while. I'll do it. Can't wait till I find her. Oh, man, she's going to pay.
That last one gave me chills the first time I listened to it because to me, she's channeling Betty Broderick. She almost sounded like her in that moment. It's another case that I would love to do a deep dive on. But wow, in jail, she was even on recordings where she continued to reveal her delusional thought process. She told friends and family that she was stunned by why Nick hadn't come to visit her. I mean, with Tracy out of the picture, she was confused as to why he wasn't just running back into her arms.
And there were other pivotal witnesses like agents from the Division of Criminal Investigation who played all the footage to the jury. It showed Michelle's movements from the Culver parking lot to parking nearby after seeing Tracy driving the F-150. Michelle parks, considering her next move. And then she's caught on camera getting out of her car to grab something from the trunk, presumably her murder kit. All those things that were later found in her car. She pulls away, and the next shot shows Tracy innocently going through the Burger King drive-thru. She stops to make her order, and all the while, Michelle is sitting in the parking lot waiting, watching. And the jury even got to see the footage from inside the Burger King as Tracy pulled up to the window to grab her order.
It was sad for me to see the order appearing on the screen. A Bacon King combo meal and a spicy crispy chicken with fries and a large Fanta. Her last meal that she shared with Nick. And that was really heartbreaking to me.
And they also showed footage of Michelle's Cadillac trailing Tracy out of Burger King, up to Vermeer, and onto the road that led to Vermeer. The video captures the truck with the Cadillac not too far behind. The next security footage from Vermeer displays the truck pulling into the parking lot, followed by the silver Cadillac, and then shows the truck parking. Just behind it, you can see Michelle in her silver Cadillac waiting in the lot the entire time that they eat. When the truck departs, the silver Cadillac waits behind her a moment to create some space between the truck and her vehicle, just to not tip Tracy off. It's all calculated. However, one thing they couldn't show the jury was the murder weapon. The knife that Michelle used was never found. They searched all of the areas between where Tracy was killed and the area near Michelle's home. She only had so many places that she could toss the knife as she drove away. They spent hours searching but found nothing.
But it seemed as though she may have pulled a Jody Arias and put it into the dishwasher among all her other knives and ran it through a cycle as soon as she walked through the door. There were plenty of other knives inside there when detectives combed through Michelle's kitchen, but they couldn't definitely say whether any of them caused Tracy's wounds because the DNA or forensic evidence had been washed away at that point. To a jury, compelling forensic evidence usually seals the deal. There was more than enough to show Michelle killed Tracy, but remember, it was more about whether this was planned or in the moment of pure rage, a crime of passion. That's why Michelle's defense didn't bother claiming that she was innocent, but she faced a far more difficult challenge during her opening statements. She basically said, she snapped. She's heartbroken, financially ruined, terrified by the pandemic, and she just lost it. Some might label it the feel sorry for me defense.
The defense pushed for a lesser charge like voluntary manslaughter. They argued it was a crime of passion, not premeditated murder, explaining away the gloves for COVID and the knife and tools as protection because she was all alone in a scary world. The defense was tasked with crafting an argument against overwhelming evidence, and she struggled to communicate with Michelle before trial. She had unrealistic expectations. In a pre-trial hearing, Michelle voiced her frustrations directly to the judge. She even submitted a letter claiming her attorneys were unfair by allowing her husband to testify against her, blaming him entirely for the situation. As in, if he hadn't had an affair and left her, this wouldn't have happened.
Right. She was a really difficult client to have. Like, she argued with her attorneys. She kind of reminded me of like a Sarah Boone, but a very diluted version of Sarah Boone, where she would just constantly complain to the judge, like, this isn't fair, that's not fair, not realizing, like, you're on trial. You don't have as many rights as you might think, but of course, you have a lot of rights, especially when it comes to the jury being there, sitting there as your peers listening to all this. But this opening statement, well, let's just say the comments on YouTube said what a lot of viewers were thinking and probably what the jury was thinking as well. What in the world does that sound? Now, courtrooms are notorious for having terrible audio. You'd think that something as important as a criminal trial, making sure everyone could be heard, would be of high priority. But that wasn't the case here. The courtroom did have good audio. It was so good, it was picking up something very odd, a vocal tick from the defense attorney. Now, this is not something anyone should feel bad about. It's a real thing, and it can occur spontaneously or when triggered by stress, for instance. But it truly was distracting. So much so, many people in the comments on YouTube while they were watching this clip that we're going to play said they couldn't pay attention to anything the defense attorney was saying because they were concentrating so much on the noises. So let's play that clip for you. Listen for it after each sentence.
On May 18th, 2020, Tracy Mondabaugh was stabbed. One of those stabs, ladies and gentlemen, was right around here. And it's that stab that nicked her heart and killed her. Now, I told you yesterday that there would be no big Perry Mason moment in this trial, that we don't have a lot of those in real life. Unlike in the TV show, there aren't typically any big dramatic reveals or unexpected twists. The kind of thing that we as viewers come to expect, and we want that, and we wait for it, and sure enough, in the end, we're rewarded. But the thing is, in here, this isn't a movie. It's not TV. What's happening in here is a real life tragedy. But I'm going to tell you right now, standing right here, before you have heard any evidence in this case, I will stand here and I will tell you that Michelle Bowe is responsible.
I'm sure she wasn't purposely trying to act like she was mocking the situation, but that's how it could have appeared to the jury.
And yeah, that's what the public said in the comments. And the last thing you would want from the person defending your freedom is to come off flippant. It really is more distracting than anything else, and it only happened during the opening statements. The rest of the trial, the defense attorney didn't seem to have this problem at all. But it's almost the same as a filler word. You know, when someone keeps saying like every few words, you can't pay attention. So it wasn't starting off that great for Michelle. But let's just play a little bit more of the opening statement.
Michelle Bowe is the one who had the knife on May 18th. And Michelle Bowe is the one that stabbed her. Now, the only thing even remotely Perry Mason-like about that, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that I'm standing here right now, 20 minutes into this trial, and I'm telling you that. But it's important that you know this isn't a whodunit. It's not a whodunit. The police got the right person. But we can't just look at May 18th. We have to go back. We have to go back, in fact, 69 days. 69 days before May 18th. A day when Michelle Bowe came home from work and she realized that her husband of 20 years, was gone. 69 days before May 18th, 2020, when Michelle Bowe realized that the home that they shared, the small house they had together at 135 Prairie Street, 69 days before he walked out the door of their home. 69 days before, when Michelle's life fell apart. She wasn't scorned, ladies and gentlemen, but she was devastated.
Given the overwhelming evidence, it was no surprise when the defense chose to put Michelle on the stand. If they wanted to argue that she was suffering from diminished capacity due to heat of passion, they had to hear it straight from Michelle herself. This was also their opportunity to humanize Michelle, hoping that the jury might find sympathy and extend some measure of mercy to her.
Michelle cried through most of her testimony, which actually backfired. She came across as emotionally unstable, with a naive and childlike perception of the events that unfolded, rather than being genuinely remorseful.
Oh, and I never thought she was even trying to come off as remorseful, especially when she recounted the struggle. She blamed everything on defenseless Tracy, strapped into the seat. But here she is explaining how painful it was, realizing Tracy and Nick were living at the apartments that she shared with him in the past.
I followed her hoping that she was going home so I could see where he was living, so I could beg him to come home.
You followed her until she stopped somewhere?
I did.
Where did she stop?
She stopped at the apartments that him and I had our first apartment at 101 Glenwood. We had our first apartment there together when we got together 21 years ago.
And when she pulled up and parked, you recognized that they were living in the same apartment that you and Nick had lived in 21 years ago.
Yes.
Michelle, why did you have a knife in your car?
Because my husband was always my protector, and I was scared when he left. I started keeping a baseball bat by the back of behind the front door. And I started keeping a knife in my nightstand in case someone would attack me. I was so scared. I had been protected all those years. Now everybody was gone.
But it's not over yet. It was time for the prosecution to cross-examine Michelle. Here are some highlights, starting with the prosecution questioning her story about wanting Culver's chicken.
You had been eating, if my memory serves me correctly, chicken pot pie all that week, right?
Yes, that I made at home.
And so you decided you didn't want to eat chicken pot pie again, right?
That's correct.
So the testimony, like you had no food at home, not exactly accurate, was it?
That was all I had in the refrigerator besides a frozen ham, sir.
So you decided to drive all the way across town, right?
Yes.
You would agree with me. You're familiar with the layout of Pella. Your house is about as south as you can get inside the city limits of Pella, and you drove all the way to the north and all the way to the west, right?
That's correct.
But when you got there, you want us to assume that you just decided that 4 cars in front of you in line was just too much, right?
That's the truth.
The truth is, you drove by and you saw Tracy in the truck, right?
That's also true.
And you just couldn't let it go, could you?
I don't understand the question. Let what go?
Tracy being near you, right?
I didn't know that Tracy was there.
So you just saw the truck, so you had to drive back and see, right?
If my husband was there, it was an opportunity to speak to him alone, maybe without her, to beg him to come home.
It seems more like she was going over to that part of town where she doesn't live to watch, to see if Nick would come around near his workplace because she knows his schedule. She's been with him a long time. She was bound to run into him or to spy on him and Tracy, like she had done numerous times before this. And as a matter of fact, she had followed them to Vermeer before, and she even got out and went over to Tracy's side of the truck and said, "I'm only going to tell you this once. Give him back. I'm his wife." Nick was on the phone with Vermeer security at the same time, and they came out and told Michelle to leave. And the prosecutor questioned her, saying, "This is exactly why you needed to follow Tracy to a different location to attack her, because you knew you couldn't do it in the work parking lot because security was there." And Michelle argued she never planned on attacking Tracy. She was only trying to scare her away.
But that contradicted messages she sent Tracy, specifically saying, "Tell him to go home because that's where he belongs. If you don't, I'll be on you soon enough. See you soon." And she did see her soon. Only 69 days after Tracy met Nick, she was dead because Michelle did what she said she would do.
And your statement to this jury was you just walked up to the car and she started hitting you.
I opened the door and she started hitting me, yes, and calling me names, calling me a crazy bitch.
She was seatbelted
I could smell the smoke coming from her car.
Ma'am, she was seatbelted in, wasn't she?
Yes, I'm assuming she was. That's what you say. Yes.
If, in fact, she threw a punch at you.
I didn't say she threw a punch. I said she was hitting me.
Okay. All you had to do was step back, right? Right?
I guess so.
But what you chose to do was turn and grab a knife, right?
She was hitting me in the face and my glasses fell off.
But you had the time to pick them up.
She was grabbing my face. No, I did not. She was grabbing my face and scratching my face and hitting me.
While she was seat belted in?
Yes. And I was...
And
Yes.
you decided to grab a knife, according to what you've told the jury here today. Right?
Yes, I snapped, yes.
And you stabbed at her repeatedly?
No, only once. I only stabbed her once.
And you stabbed her while you were over the top of her, right?
No.
Well, the downward angle, your stab motion was downward, wasn't it?
I don't know. My eyes were closed. I don't know what I was stabbing. She had her hand in my face.
And you scratched her face.
Yes.
And you sliced her right thumb.
I don't know. It was a struggle. We were having a tussle, a struggle, a fight,
And then you chose to stab her. Right?
I snapped. And I stabbed her, yes.
The sympathy card will work with some juries, but this jury wasn't buying it. The premeditation was all over the place, from the repeated threats to the act of physically confronting Tracy while trapped in her seatbelt. The drive home, the shower, the hidden evidence, that's consciousness of guilt 101.
The jury deliberated for just 45 minutes, basically the time it takes to watch a short TV episode, definitely shorter than one of these videos, and they came back with a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. In Iowa, that means a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
In the matter of the state of Iowa versus Michelle Lee Bowe, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, verdict form number 1. Is that your verdict, members of the jury? Yes. So say all of you.
Tracy's family wasn't in the courtroom due to COVID-19 restrictions, but they waited down the hall. And when they heard the verdict, their cries could be heard echoing through those hallways. Don't forget, Tracy left behind 4 children and 10 grandchildren. They lost a mom, a grandma, a sister, a daughter. No prison sentence can fix that, but at least they felt some semblance of justice.
And Michelle's appeals were all denied. She's still locked up. In an odd twist that some might call too soon, Nick hopped on Facebook after everything ended, and he posted an apology to Tracy's family, saying how much he loved her, how he'd swap places if he could, and the heartbreak of losing Tracy he must have felt was crushing. But get this, just 3 months after the murder, Nick was engaged again to someone new and also someone he found on Facebook.
I guess sometimes people just don't want to be alone, especially during COVID, because it was a crazy time. This case showed us how heartbreak, obsession, and the delusion that a partner's property can spiral into violence. Yes, the pandemic stressed everyone out. Yes, breakups happened, but none of it excuses stalking, threats, or taking another person's life. Tracy, who connected with Nick over a random misclick on Facebook, paid the ultimate price for Michelle's rage. That single friend request triggered a chain reaction of heartbreak, fury, and eventually murder.
Now Michelle sits in prison, Nick is engaged again, and Tracy's family is left to mourn a life cut short.
If there's any lesson here, it's that heartbreak can be soul-crushing, but you can't let it consume you to the point where you see violence as a solution. Therapy's out there, and it can work wonders. Time can heal you, but death is permanent. We want to thank all of you so much for being here for Tracy's story today. We'll see you in our next video. Bye.